four Shining Shades have taken a more active role in the story as of late, from meeting the Ruler of Death in Natlan to getting a massive lore drop about the Ruler of Life to Istaroth's powers being on full display in the most recent Dainslift quest. And now, of course, Hoyo just dropped a video of all of them meeting together. I mean, seriously, that just dropped completely out of nowhere, though thankfully Hoyo at least had the decency to wait until I was still scripting this video to drop this new lore for us, because I would have been super pissed if I had done all of this work and then released the video and then like an hour later Hoyo revealed a whole bunch more information, which has happened to me more often than you might think. Still, it wasn't until recently that we actually knew much about anything of them at all. Up until Natlan, Istaroth was the Shining Shade that we knew the most about, and even then, we didn't exactly have a lot of solid information about her. So now that they're gaining more traction in the main story, I thought I'd make a video about everything we know for sure about them, and also some mini theories I have about some things we'll see moving forward. Hopefully you'll be caught up on the important lore bits before Nodcry comes along and hits all of us with a 2x4. So with all of that being said, let's get into it. So I'm not going to spend very much time on this portion of the video, mostly because I find this part of Tevat's history to be confusing. Seriously, why Hoyo has insisted on using the many names and titles trope for pretty much every character in Tevat, I will never know. Some sources say that the Heavenly Principles is the primordial one, while others say the Heavenly Principles came later and fought the primordial one. The video that dropped on God's Limit seems to imply that the primordial one and the Heavenly Principles are the same, so for the rest of this video, just assume that they are one and the same person. I just really can't figure out which one is correct, and I'm not going to deal with it. So what we do know is that the four Shining Shades were created by the Heavenly Principles, who was, we can assume, to be the first Descender. They were acting as their envoys and emissaries. You'll note that the Seelie seemed to be on good terms with the Shades, at least at first, before the Voyager came to Tevat. What the Shades' relationships with the other gods of Tevat, like the three Moon Sisters, is currently unknown, though I'm gonna go ahead and assume probably wasn't great. I'm sure we'll get a lot more lore on that particular piece once we're in Nodcry. The TLDR of this section is that the Shades were created by the first Descender, the Heavenly Principles, and therefore are beholden to its will. But the Shades are not a naturally occurring part of Tevat. They are not bound to it in the same way that, say, the Archons or Vision Bearers are. So, now that we have some basic information out of the way, let's dive into some of the actual Shades, and we'll start with the Shade of Time. Istaroth is the Shade that we have gotten the most information about in the series so far, which is interesting considering up until the God's Limit video, we actually hadn't seen Istaroth in the game. Istaroth has had influence in pretty much every nation of Tevat, from Enkonomiya to Inazuma to Mondstadt. There's even evidence of Istaroth being involved in places like Fontaine and Sumeru. However, one thing that's always seemed strange about Istaroth is the fact that Istaroth seems to be, in a sense, working against the Heavenly Principles. In Enkonomiya, Istaroth answered the prayers of humans who had been abandoned by the Heavenly Principles, granting them the knowledge to build the Dainichi no Mikoshi, a device that would grant them light in the darkness that they had sunken into during the Great Flood. Istaroth also granted Makoto her powers, allowing her to plant the seed of the sacred sakura tree in the distant past of Inazuma. This occurred during the Cataclysm, and perhaps it was even why Makoto went to Conria in the first place, given Makoto was not a strong fighter when you compared her to A. While this is pure speculation, it's possible that Makoto went to Conria knowing that the Shades were likely to be there so that she could ask for aid in defeating the abyssal monsters that were attacking Inazuma. A even mentions that without the strength of the sacred Sakura, she likely wouldn't have been able to fend off the attacks bombarding Inazuma. Of course, this did result in Makoto's death, but even so, for a Shade to act so boldly, it does raise questions. Leaving Inazuma behind, we come to Mondstadt. There's evidence that Istaroth was worshipped for some time at the Thousand Winds Temple, even before Barbatos ascended to become the Anemo Archon. Istaroth and Barbatos were worshipped side by side until eventually, over time, her memory was more or less wiped away from the people of Mondstadt. Her powers, over time, were attributed to Barbatos instead. Barbados himself has some very strange connections to time as well. He knows every song that ever will or ever has been written. Not to mention, Barbados seems to know a lot more about the workings of Teyvat than he would like many to believe. The exact connection between Barbados and Istaroth isn't known at the moment. There are many theories, some of which I mention in my other Istaroth videos, so please go check them out if you have the time. But for now, all we really know is that Istaroth has been involved in Mondstadt, likely from the beginning. In fact, it's the nation that seems to have the most direct connections to her. It's also interesting that Istaroth was worshipped at all in Mondstadt, as the Lord of the Night makes the mention that the Shades don't like their names being used by anyone, even the Archons, and prefer to observe and work in the shadows. Being outright worshipped in Mondstadt certainly seems to go against this theory. Speaking of Natlan, the largest scale use of Istaroth's power was seen in the most recent Dainslift quest, where it seems Istaroth used her power to connect the Traveler to Conria just before the Cataclysm, giving them a glimpse into what actually happened, along with allowing the key to their ship to be brought back into the past as the Abyss sibling was reconstructing Conria from memories. Something else interesting to note is that it seems as if the Abyss sibling must have had some blessing from Istaroth to even attempt this Loom of Fate idea to begin with. While this is pure speculation on my part, I think part of Istaroth's abilities are in relation to memories themselves. After all, what are memories if not moments of time preserved for people? While we can also see from the video that Hoyo dropped recently that Istaroth seems to be one out of the 3 shades shown to be willing to bend the rules the most. What these rules exactly are and who made them is still somewhat up for debate, but I think we can reasonably assume that it's the Heavenly Principles. When asked why Istaroth interferes the way she does, she simply replies that she must pass the time somehow. This indifferent way she views the world isn't surprising. In fact, I would argue the Shades by their nature must hold themselves apart from the world, and perhaps that in and of itself is why we're seeing things beginning to unfold the way they are. Questioning the rules seems to be a taboo amongst the Shades, which we also see when Reindotir speculates about what the Shade of Space is up to. But even still, with a lack of direct orders from the Heavenly Principles, it seems as if the Shades are beginning to act more of their own accord, deciding the fate of Teyvat amongst themselves. While I could speculate more about Istaroth here, that's probably best saved for another video, so let's instead focus on another shade, the Shade of Death. We first see Ronova in Natlan. Capitano confronts her, forcing her to choose between the rules that she set for Natlan, meaning whoever used her power was meant to die, and the Curse of Immortality, something which was likely set by the Heavenly Principles. Ronova makes the choice to abandon the rules she set for Natlan, allowing Capitano to trigger the paradox, which, by extension, ends up saving all of Natlan's ley lines. From this interaction, we see Ronova is somewhat perturbed that Capitano managed to catch her out like this. For the Lord of the Night, we also get the idea that Ronova is somewhat of a pitiable creature, the kind of person who sticks her head in the sand, so to speak, or shirks off responsibility onto others. We can see this with Xbalanque as well, given that she tells him that if the Heavenly Principles ever caught wind of what they've done, that she would blame him as a thief and the punishment would be his alone to bear. However, from the God's Limit video that just dropped, we see Ronova in a bit of a different light. She seems beholden to the rules, even more so than one might expect. She takes orders from the Heavenly Principles and seems to be one out of the 3 that is the least comfortable bending the rules in any fashion, which is interesting since she's the one to gift Xbalanque a portion of her power. From here, we get the sense that she's following the Heavenly Principles, but, and this is just speculation on my part, it seems less that Renova's doing this out of actual loyalty and more out of fear. Given that she's a shade of the Heavenly Principles, perhaps she fears her own death, the reabsorption of herself into the Heavenly Principles, or perhaps there is more at work here than just that. Something else interesting to note, and I realized this after watching the video a second time through, the omnipresent god statue in Inazuma, which many have thought to be a reference to Istaroth, has a lot more in common with Ronova. The wings on the statue of the god resemble the rings of Ronova to a T. I'll probably make a full video about this at some point, but for right now, I think the statue actually resembles Ronova a bit more than Istaroth, though I do also have to wonder, could the statue not be of one of the shades, but of all four, the amalgamation, which would be the heavenly principles? But again, that's a theory for a different video. Now that we've spoken about Ronova, let's move to her opposite, Naberius, the Shade of Life. We find out that during the Paralogism story quest from Albedo that Rheindatir merged with Naberius. It's hinted that she did this as a way to regain her sanity, though why she was losing her sanity to begin with is a bit up for debate. It could be a curse placed on her that all the Conrians had, or it could be for a different reason entirely. Interestingly enough, we don't yet know the exact mechanism by which Rheindatir achieved this result, though we know it somehow meant that she had consumed Naberius' heart. This is also interesting, since Naberius only gained power over life in Teyvat by using the Primordial Sea, the heart of which she had stolen from the first Hydro Dragon. She then entrusted the heart to Egeria, who went against the Heavenly Principles and created life from the Oceanids, giving them a human form. This obviously played out in the Fontaine Archon quest, where the Hydro Archon seat was destroyed and the power of the Hydro Authority returned to New Violette. It's important to note that Naberius herself was likely already, in a sense, dormant, or maybe even dead by this point. Rheindatir had to consume Naberius' heart in order to merge with her. This indicates that she might not have been completely sentient, or maybe didn't have a complete host body. From the God's Limit video, we can see that Naberius and Rheindatir appear to sort of coexist in the same body. Rheindatir appears to be the one mainly in control, but Naberius is not without her influence. Even so, it doesn't seem like the two are at odds with one another. Rheindatir even stating that she really respects Naberius, and Naberius appears to feel the same way about her, even if she is bending the rules a bit too much, in her opinion. Much beyond that, though, is still unknown, though surely we are going to learn more as time goes on. So let's talk about the last and most elusive shade, the Shade of Space. Asmoday is the shade at the beginning of the game which separates the traveler from their sibling, calling herself the Sustainer of Heavenly Principles. However, it seems as if there's more to Asmoday that meets the eye. Asmoday does not appear in the meeting between the shades, causing speculation to arise that she might have defected. We know that Asmoday would have been partially responsible along with Ronova for destroying Conria, and we know that because it's her cubes that seem to be causing widespread destruction in the nation. While during our escape she calls herself the Sustainer of Heavenly Principles, and it's indicated that at least at one point she might have been the most loyal to the Heavenly Principles, now it seems as if she's found a new master, something which the others comment that if she truly has defected, must mean that she loves her new master even more than herself. This harkens back to my original theory that the Heavenly Principles could essentially reabsorb the shades should they desire to. Though, it seems again as if the Heavenly Principles are still asleep, which the shades seem to want to keep that way. This only further cements my theory that the Heavenly Principles does not have true loyalty from the shades, but instead more or less has them controlled through fear. This is going to lead me to my final theory of this video, which focuses more on the God's Limit video than anything else, and I'll probably do a full deep dive sometime later, but for now I'm going to leave you all with this theory. There's been a popular theory among fans for some time that the Shades and the Heavenly Principles are represented by the various artifact sets in Genshin. The Sands of Time, the Flower of Life, the Plume of Death, the Goblet of Space, and, of course, the Circlet of Reason. Obviously, this means that the Heavenly Principles must be represented by the Circlet of Reason, as the other four are accounted for. But the video starts off by telling us that the Shades do not obey reason. This is something directly contrasted by the Shades themselves, who seem to be more or less beholden to their own rules and their fear of the Heavenly Principles. So, this is my theory. I believe the Shade of Space is essentially working with the Tsaritsa to take down the Heavenly Principles in order to rewrite the fate of being a Shade. Genshin Impact's story has revolved around the fate of Teyvat for quite some time, and the fate of various characters within the story. The idea that fate cannot be altered or escaped except by very powerful beings. I think the Shades themselves are bound to fate much in the same way the inhabitants of Tevat are. They are all bound to reason. Perhaps they may not wish to obey reason, but they are all bound to it. Perhaps the story at the beginning was meant to tell us that while the Shades rule over even the Archons, they themselves cannot escape their own creator, who, in a sense, is the sum of all of their parts. But there you have it, a rundown of everything you need to know about the Shades and some mini-theories thrown in for flavor. What do y'all think? Do you agree? Disagree? Let me know in the comments. If you did like this video, then please like, share with a friend, subscribe, and most importantly, comment so I don't feel like I'm screaming into the void. And, as always, may the wind bless your travels.